Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. It's been a while, but it's nice to have you, especially because we're going back to one of our most important series, the series on the Seforim of Rav Chaim Kamenetsky. And even though Rav Chaim Kamenetsky is already not with us a good couple of years, but there's so much content that's still being created, but there's some of his classics that we have not even gotten to. And I think this series, I'll call it a mini series within the greater Chaim Kamenetsky series, is going to be about Reb Chaim Kamenetsky's Chumash Seforim. I'll let Rabbi Brut talk about them. I know of one, Time of the Kra, which I'm sure many others know about. There are probably some others that Rabbi Brut could share with us. But as always, we have to mention our anonymous sponsor for the whole of Chaim Kamenetsky series, the ongoing series, sponsored anonymously, Le'ila Nishmas, Rav Moshe Chaim Ben Yitzchak David, may his neshama have an aliyah. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my partner, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. It's been a long time since we've done Rav Chaim already. So we're towards the beginning still of the cycle of learning Chumash. We're in the beginnings, the first few parashas still of Bereshis. So what I'll be saying tonight and the next few episodes will be relevant, as we'll see. So Reb Chaim Kamenetsky, as we've already learned through the various episodes, wrote on all areas of Torah. One area that he wrote about was Torah, Chumash, Tanach. So his famous work is Time of the Kra, and there's some other works, and through the next few episodes we're going to discuss them and what we can learn from them in all different aspects. So first is, just to mention, besides the Time of the Kra, there's a work called the Mechsei Atik, which we'll discuss at length. We also spoke about his Beis and Leches HaMishkan, which is an early work, but it focuses on the parashas of Truma, Tetzaveh, Yaakov Kamenetsky, and there he goes in intense in depth in those parashas of the Mishkan and the Big Dekuna. But there's other works relating to Reb Chaim with Chumash. Number one is that, like everything else, Time of the Kra, as we'll see in a mamash briefly, it developed. It started out small, and eventually today, if you want to go buy Time of the Kra, there's a Time of the Kra. Then there's 3 volumes on the Megillus already. And after he was nifter, they put out a Time of the Kra on Tehillim. Now, just to throw out there, the works on Megillus Esther are incredible, and on Rus, even if you have an old standard Time of the Kra from a few years back, there's tons and tons of material, because basically he spent most of his time on Purim learning, and this was the materials that he wrote. Now, there's also in recent years the Das Noita series, which is a collection, which is a whole team of people gathering from all his letters that he got, the thousands and thousands of letters. So they've put out already a bunch of volumes on Chumash. I don't know how many they plan on putting out. If they plan on doing 52 volumes, similar to Shlomo Kluger, who also the Machon of Shlomo Kluger is already coming to an end, which is multiple volumes of Shlomo Kluger's manuscripts. So we'll have Reb Chaim Kamenetsky one bookcase, another bookcase of Shlomo Kluger's bookcase. But there's also famous Seforim that came out already in his lifetime, L'mashal Derech Sicha, a few volumes, and some other volumes by people that were zeicha to have a close kesher with Reb Chaim Kamenetsky, and some of them were put out already in his lifetime. These are conversations that they had with him. Some were at the Shabbos table, and in all of them, there's plenty of valuable material in them. Besides for this, and this relates to Chumash, as we'll see also, is his notes that he published in his lifetime on Medrash Rabbah, and relating to all this, we'll see how Eitzim Medrashim, his notes on the Eitzim Medrashim, and the work Sefer HaYashar that Reb Chaim Kamenetsky also allowed them to publish his notes in his lifetime about this work. So now to begin, the Time of the Kra, when's it first published? So it seems it's published the first time in 1969 as a small work, part of the Sich HaSadeh, and he publishes it over there. In the first introduction, he writes something to the effect like this: some chedushim that he has b'psukei Torah for zikaron bibli iyun haroi. He didn't look into it properly to see if what he said is true. However, rubam b'derech pshat al pi atzois b'divrei Chazal, and some are derech drushay remes. And then he also went ahead and publishes some other contrasim, and that's now today known as the Sichas, which we spoke about already back in season 1. He publishes it with stuff from his father. Okay, now that's the first introduction. This is published back in 69. In the shar of the sefer, which we also pointed out many times, he gives a little more insight to the sefer. He says, "Chedushim abiurim ala Torah al neviim uksuvim ruba medarach pshutei shal mikra al pi mamari chazal hamufazarim b'shas u'medrashim u'kamay shomer chazal huve b'toises krisos divrei Torah aniyim b'mekayim v'ashirim b'makam acher v'ktasim al pi drush v'remes." So this is a theme that we've mentioned numerous times. Chaim Kamenetsky, with his vast bekias of of all over Kol Torah Kula, the full gamut of Kol Torah Kula, Bavli, Yerushalmi, Medrash, Chazal. So he uses it to weave together, to piece together all different things. And we're going to see how it plays out in Chumash, like it did in many other things. Already in the first episode, when we spoke about his work on the Rambam, we saw how he used his vast bekias of Torah to show and demonstrate thousands of makayos for the Rambam. So he does this in Chumash too. Okay, fast forward, 1973 about. He publishes it a little more updated as its own sefer. Then again in 1987. And each time he added stuff. Okay. Now, in these versions, his father went through it. In one of the places I saw that his father told him to take out certain stuff. Obviously, I would love to see what those materials were that his father felt he shouldn't publish and why his father felt he shouldn't publish those pieces, and if they ever came back into the final edition that was published in 2012 in the latest Time of the Kra. Now, at one point, for most of the Time of the Kra was in back of the Beis and Mishkan. Eventually, it becomes its own sefer. Now, a lot of the editions of the sefer were with Lemechsei Atik, and eventually Lemechsei Atik became its own sefer. So today, as I said already, if you want to buy Time of the Kra, you have to buy Time of the Kra. Then you could buy Time of the Kra in the Megillas. You can buy Lemechsei Atik as its own sefer, and the rest of the works. Okay. So always, I'm fond of mentioning. So first, I always say the Shar and the Hagdama is written by Reb Chaim. So he's writing about the sefer. From the first time he talks about it, when he says "Rishamti lezikaron mibli'in haroi," it sounds like some type of a downplay of publishing the sefer. Okay, so we've quoted numerous times in his lifetime already. It came out a sefer about his seforim from the family. It's called Seforim. So over there, originally talks about the first time it was L'Zecher Nishmas, his mother. It has materials of Chazanish. They mention also the Steipler going through it. Fine. Now, it says over here that they write that Reb Chaim Kamenetsky didn't know why his father took out these pieces and even wrote that down, so I obviously would love to have that insight. Fine. Anyway, he puts it out to the... Why does he put it out with Bryce and Mechas Mishkan? Because there was some type of thing, like he doesn't want to put out a sefer on Chumash. In the back of the Bryce and Mechas Mishkan, Derech Agav, he's going to put out some of his Torah on Chumash. So there's a famous story, and they bring it over here also. And that's a story with Ar Sameach, that he had a sefer. He put out Ar Sameach first, even though the Meshech Chochmah, it seems, was ready much earlier. So without getting into all the details of the exact story, but the point was, his father, I think, told him, first put out Ar Sameach, then the Meshech Chochmah, something to the effect, you become known as a Chumash Yid. L'maisa, the Meshech Chochmah is more famous than the Ar Sameach. But don't worry, it has its name in the right proper place in the yeshiva world with unbelievable chashivas. The Meshech Chochmah gets is mamish up there. So I don't know if he has to worry. He had to worry about anything.
And the Ar Sameach is known as the Ar Sameach.
Yes.
That's what he's called. Meir Simchas is called Ar Sameach, not the Meshech Chochmah.
Right. So because his father was nervous, like some fathers are, but in the case of Meir Simcha, both Svarim today are part of the canon without Roy for its own few episodes, not for now. Now, but the point is, Reb Chaim Kamenetsky, someone must have told him, so that's why it was like put on the back. It's the back of the sefer, the Reiches Lachas HaMishkan. Again, this is going with my diak already in the Hagdama. Yeah, Beli'in Harai. Now, fine. So the question is, number one, right away, is there any feedback? Do we know any feedback already back in 1969 about it? So if you remember way back in previous episodes, we spoke about the correspondence between Reb Chaim Kamenetsky and Reb Landau. Those gesund and stark, still active and leading Klal Yisrael. So in these incredible letters, we see already back immediately after 1969, when he gets a copy of the Simchas, he writes a bunch of Ha'aros to Reb Chaim Kamenetsky. Okay, so Reb Chaim Kamenetsky, and I, of course, it's always fascinating to see they're handling a pasuk in Isaiah and a Targum Yonason over there, and all different, a nusach and a diktuk over there, Seder, and all different other things. So Chaim Kamenetsky writes him back in 1969. Thank you so much for your spending time to look be'iyun at my sefer. Fine. A few years later, he writes him again. Now this time, this is already going to the, as I already mentioned, there was a new edition. This is in the second edition of Reb Chaim Kamenetsky's Time in the Kra. So Reb Dov Landau writes to him, Parsha Shemais, I want to send you a bunch of Ha'aros. Some are big, some are not, and he sends him mamish a bunch of Ha'aros. You could tell he went through the sefer very carefully, over 20 Ha'aros about it. Then he says, even though it might sound like I'm giving you bikoret, I'm being critical or something, still please answer me, etc., etc. Fine. So Chaim Kamenetsky writes back to him immediately, and literally a week later. He says, any mechaber, what's his greatest wish? That a Talmud Chacham Gedolim should look at their Seforim, and that's what you're doing. So of course I'll answer you, and he answers him a bunch of things. Fine, and then again, the next week, Dov writes to him again a bunch of Ha'aros, and again he replies to him, again he's apologizing for his sharfkeit. Don't worry about it. And at the end, Reb Chaim Kamenetsky says, Ikar Simchas HaTorah hu hamasa matan b'halacha ukeshem shem partzufein doimen v'chulu uminim minei destayim shmaitza ani sameach ma'oid memichtuvei divrei Torah b'prat megaver rabba kavase v'yesh lo lahashav asmachoi lekabel oid tshuva, and I'm more than happy to have more. Point is, already right away in Bnei Brak, these people, as I already commented then, they live not so far from each other, but they communicated. They didn't have phones. Probably, maybe both of them didn't even have phones at that time. Even though it's only the 1970s, it's before emails for us and everything. They didn't have WhatsApp. This is how they communicated in learning. And Baruch Hashem, a few years ago, this was published. Okay. Now, I would like to suggest, after spending a lot of time going through the whole time of the Kra, now obviously I did not learn every single piece, and I'm only waiting for the 5-volume set that's going to come out in the next few years, sponsored by some Gvir, which is going to be Mefarish every Tag Shabbat Tag and every Maramukim of Reb Chaim Kamenetsky. In Mitzvah Shem, that probably will happen shortly, as it started to happen with some of this farm. We've pointed this out. But my take is like this. It's not a random work. It's someone who learned Tanach well over time. An investigation of the library that he's quoting is going to show us certain things, as well as the style of the various pieces, as I'll mention. We know from the Chayvis of Reb Chaim Kamenetsky that he would learn every day Nach, not only Torah, Nach. And this work is, first of all, Time of the Kra has not only pieces on Daf Torah. Once he was working on Daf Torah, sometimes he would throw in a few more pieces. So when they broke it up, so originally this Torah was the Nach pieces were only found at the end of each parsha. But then when they started made it into a fancier sefer, so to speak, so they made it separate. So he felt that every time it's published, he has to add something new. So like go to Chaim Kamenetsky, pops out another few pieces of Torah, puts it in there. So the point is that we're seeing over here a remarkable display of his Bekias, which we've spoken about already from the first episode. And I'm going to put it in context how this plays out. Again, we also see incredible originality. And as he emphasizes in the Shar and in his introduction, he's pshat-oriented. He's definitely very pshat-oriented. And we're going to see certain types of questions that he's very concerned with. But on the other hand, I feel that he's holding back. And part of the holding back is he didn't want that he's going to go down as it's Chaim Kamenetsky, the Chumash Yid. You say he was putting in his kaiches was lamashal, his derech hamuna. You look in the pictures, you see what he learned. He spent hours and hours learning the derech hamuna, researching it, the piles of svarim when he used to sit in Kol Chazon Ish. So time Kra, it's not based on, that he sat for 4 hours, let's say, and he had piles of Chumash and everything. But as we'll see more about it shortly. Lamashal, a friend of mine told me, Moshe David Chechik, his name is, one day he went over to Reb Chaim Kamenetsky, and he told him it was about a certain piece in time in the Kra, where you bring down a Medrash, a far out Medrash. So he told him, why are you bringing out such a Medrash? It's very simple. There is a Targum Yerushalmi on the right over there in the pasuk. So now, and we're going to see Reb Chaim Kamenetsky, new Targum, ganz fine. So Reb Chaim Kamenetsky smiles at him from ear to ear and tells him, what does it bother you that I quoted the Farik the Medrash instead? I mean, to say this wasn't a thought out work. At that time, that's what his memory remembered, so he was using in the piece of Torah. But it's not like every pasuk or every piece in this thing, he sat down, he went to his library, similar to what he did Taka by Derech Hamuna Lamashal, and he had the piles and he was checking everything. It was more like, he remembers the Ramban, and the next time when he updates the piece, he remembers a Cheskuni and he remembers a Say that's more how he looked at it. But there's like something what I'm trying to bring out. It was done in a aray oifin, not to be bekvius of someone sitting and learning Chumash many hours a day. Also, we see it's like a fascinating thing. These are pieces of Torah that on one hand, it says somewhere in one of the places, it says he came up with this stuff during laning. Now, it's Yedua, the Steipler, Taka came up with materials for his Birchas Peretz during laning. But that's more gematrias and stuff like that. Here, there's like fascinating pieces. It's so hard to believe. On the other hand, Reb Chaim Kamenetsky, we are seeing over the many, many episodes that he was unbelievable about Kishra and underrated, so to speak, in this aspect. So for him, it was easy to come up with this type of Torah. But, okay. Now, it could be that part of the Nakuda also was he only spent a limited amount of time learning Chumash and Nach. He had letters to answer, as we said. Every day he had letters. He had the chayvus to do, and he had his big seforim that he wanted to do. So he didn't want to take away from his big seforim to work on a massive time of the Gra type of pirish on Chumash. Whereas, let's say the Malbim or the Meshech Chacham we just mentioned, they felt it was Taka Kedai. Even the Netziv, the Heimek Davar, one of the Gedolei Rosh Yeshivas of his time, one of the Gedolei Adar of his time, he printed in his lifetime as Heimek Davar. So there's different kishot. I don't know how to reckon. I don't know exactly, we would need to have a conversation with Chaim Kamenetsky about this. But anyway, bottom line is, after everything is said and done, if you look carefully through this work, I'm going to demonstrate we can see how one can learn Chumash and Nach by highlighting various things. So I don't have an answer when he learned Chumash, but he obviously did it over time. Now, Lamashal, many Gedolim, Lamashal, the Chazanish, the Steipler, they learn Chumash. Not only that, Kiyadua, they both were very makbid. So they didn't just like do it in an oifen, like, okay, got to be Yotzei, got to get that school in. When they learned it. But again, we don't have anything from the Chazanish on Chumash. The Steipler we do have is gematries, and we also have nice shmuzin, but we don't have like even a time in the Kra type of work. Lamaisa, in a letter, as the Steipler was known for many years as the Das Torah for many Bachar Yeshiva, so he had millions of letters published, beautiful letters in Kraim Digrisa about Mahalach HaLimud, which is famous that he was actually against a lot of the Mahalach HaLimud already then. Forget about what he would say today. So Derech Agav, in one of the letters, he says, what about learning the Chumash? So he says you should do Shnai Mikra V'cha Targum. Afterwards, after you do the Targum, you should do Rashi as much as you could. If you have time, learn some extra Mefarshim. But again, you don't see an exact amount, how much time you should spend. And so here, it's relative to make some general remarks and to move from here to explain what's going on with Reb Chaim Kamenetsky. Chumash, and especially Nach, have been neglected for centuries on different levels and for different reasons. Today, I'm not going to trace all aspects of it. It's worthy of many different podcasts, but I'm going to mention just a few different nakudis over here and then plug it in with moving on with Reb Chaim Kamenetsky. It was a very chashuv yid that lived in Petach Tikva, a Rav. His name was Reb Shmuel David HaKohen Monk. He wrote a lot, prolific, and Pas Sadecha, the name is his Chuvas, and he graduated as a Meirdik Abaki in Chumash also, in all aspects of Chumash and Nach. And he has a tshuva in Yeridei Siman Kuf Yud Aleph where he talks about learning Chumash. And in the course of his tshuva, he says that he gives credit that at one point, in more recent years, relatively, the achrayus to blame on why Nach and Chumash has not come back into the system, so to speak, is because of Haskalah, because in that period of time, the 1800s and onwards, they learned too much, and any time someone would be learning Chumash, or especially Navi, they would suspect him of minus. So from there on, it became a thing that we stay away from. So yes, you learn Chumash and Navi in a certain level in the yeshiva system, but very not as with the same emphasis as other things. He says, so he writes, Bisman hazeh, and he's talking about the 50s, 60s, 70s, Bisman hazeh, dain yesh bnei adam shaminig avayseim biyadeyim laharchik es yediyas hamikra ve'enam mizbainim ki ikrak peida haisvi mei hamaskilim. It was in that period of time, not anymore. Varei oisim bnei adam mevatam yediyas chelik min hatayra shenis chayavnu biyadiyosai ve'ein lehem tainus maspekes bisman hazeh. There's no good excuse not to be learning it today properly. Okay, but obviously there's a lot more to say. If someone's looking for a heter, you want to know if you can learn Nach today. So Shlomo Kluger, who was in the time of Maskilim and who was a person who battled Maskilim, so he has a tshuva, and he says, he was asked him, Roy Lulmay Bezman a Tanach and Perusha Kadmoinim, he says, Vadei Roy Lasaskin. He talks about the famous Gemara that is also part of this conversation, Menu B'nechem and the Hegyoim, what's going on, and he says, Avada Iker Limud is supposed to be Shas and Paiskim, but Lumay Shah Beis 1 or 2 hours in Tanach and Perusha Kadmoinim, Vadai Mutter V'chein Iker. These are Shlomo Kluger Paskins. Ki Yadua, for us Americans, Yaakov Kamenetsky, this was a thing that he wrote about, spoke about very often, and you can find throughout his writings that are published, Lamashal and Emes Yaakov al Torah, Emes Yaakov al Nach, that's been published, which is basically a systematic shiur that he gave on Gans Nach. And he deals with this question, and then speeches he gave, and he encouraged the learning of Chumash Biyun and Navi Biyun. Now, again, I'm not telling, the conversation today is not about changing curriculums. It's more about adults. When you're older already and you're your own person, so you should make time. You have to make time, and that's part of what's possibly going on between Shnai and Mikra Targum on some level. But I'll just quote one lashon from Yaakov Kamenetsky in a speech that he gave at one point in the 70s. When he's talking about Chumash. And he says, unfortunately, too many of us are also outfitted with child-sized conceptions of Chumash from which we never divest ourselves. We continue to understand Esav according to our Cheder training. But we have, and then he goes on, we have grown up since, and so must our understanding of the personalities and events of Chumash mature. There's unbelievable levels and layers going on in Chumash and interpretations of Chazal, and it should be done. And Rabbi Kamenetsky, I believe I read once, Rabbi Kamenetsky said why he was zeicha to learn Nach was because he wasn't a Rav's son. So he said Rabbanim sons were in Little were not able to learn Nach. This can be verified through various autobiographical accounts in whether you were Litvische, even in Hasidische, for sure Hasidische Stiebel. If you were caught learning Nach and you were a good person, they still said the raid would get out. Oh, he's a maskil. So Rabbi Kamenetsky on some level was able to get away with it because he wasn't a Rav's son, so there weren't so many eyes on him in this small little key Shtetlach. So he was able to get away learning Nach already at a young age. Okay. So these are some general remarks, and just to mention a few more brief remarks. Number one, there's an incredible work which was a best-selling work for years and years in Yiddish called the Simchas HaNefesh. So Simchas HaNefesh was eventually translated in our generation one time into Hebrew. Incredible Musar sefer, and over there he talks about all different things in a beautiful way, in a simchadika way, not in a harsh way. And one of the things he has arichos about is Rosh L'Kol Tzrichim Lulmoidim Tashbar Esrim V'Arba Merosh Vatzoif Ima Diktuk, and he quotes in the famous Mishnah, and he talks all about it, and he says that basically if you don't have the fundamental basics in Chumash and Diktuk and in Tanach, it has a major effect down the line, and this is Yadua. The Pri Megadim, the great Pri Megadim, who all of Klal Yisrael, from when his work came out, and Ad Hayoim, study it, whether in Chaim or Yardei, you don't move without the Pri Megadim, in fascinating series of letters that are found in the various editions, especially in the Mechon Yerushalayim edition. So he was known again, what this even means. He was also a Rav, but sometimes he's called a Mikra Dardiki. He was a tutor, he was a teacher for children, whatever. Don't worry about it, it's not for now, but he was also a ganz fine Rav, and as we know from the Pri Megadim, what he was. Point is, he emphasized Keseder, the chiv of learning Tanach, Chumash Biyun, Chumash with Rashi, Mizrahi, and this is something he emphasizes. In a work, another work from a great Melamed who spent years educating people in Lita. He was a Talmud, clearly from influence from Reb Chaim Volozhin, or possibly an actual Talmud of Reb Chaim Volozhin, but a Litvish Talmud. He wrote an incredible sefer called Menucha Kedosha, a sefer that was used by many, how to educate their kids at 13, 14 years old. And he also at length talks about the great importance of learning Chumash and Nach. Interestingly enough, parts of this was censored out in recent years, and then it was put back recent years, and the whole story behind that is not for now. But the point is, there's numerous marmakayim. It is pasha to learn the chashivas of learning Chumash and Nach. Just because people always complain, I don't throw out there. Recently, I was looking derech hagav. I came across the Satmar Rebbe also said you should learn, make sure to be an expert in Tanach. Ramosha Clears writes also, and they write about him, also Hasidic Yid in Eretz Yisrael, about his ideas in Tanach and how he was noig to be every day to have a seder in it. And it's very important. One has to know this area of Torah and how important it is. So now, it's pashut for Chaim Kamenetsky is the same way. So now, way back in the early episodes of Chaim Kamenetsky, I mentioned that he was influenced by 4 great people, and we could find all different things of him will go back to these 4 people: his father, the Chazon Ish, his uncle, the Mishnah Brura, and the Vilna Gaon. So these 4 people, they were his like heroes, and everything goes back to that he's copying or has something to do with things that come from them. So as I mentioned already, learning Chumash and Nach on this level and putting out this time of the Kra. So the Chazon Ish, although in time of the Kra, Taka brings pieces from the Chazon Ish, stuff that he spoke to him or he heard, but we don't have works of the Chazon Ish on this area. The Steipler too, even though, again, we have materials from the Steipler over here in this sefer, but we don't find this same type of level that we have by him over here in the time of the Kra that we find by the Steipler. Lamaisa, who was his Rebbe for in his early years, so was the Steipler. So we find in the Sefer Derech Sicha that already the Reb Chaim Kamenetsky told them that his father taught him Chumash and Nevi'im Rishonim without Rashi, because he held you have to know Nach, but again, not in this level. So where does it come from? So do we know anything about Chafetz Chaim and Chumash? This is an interesting question. So in the work that I'm very fond of quoting time and time again, from the Chafetz Chaim's son, he says that his father was noyig on Shabbos. He didn't learn Iyun. What was his asik on Shabbos? What was the Chafetz Chaim's asik? Apiroi Parshas HaShavua, he would sometimes learn with others in Pirish Rashi v'Ramban, and he says he was nischadish harba rayanot on each pasuk a pasuk, and he would say them over. And there are people, the Chafetz Chaim son was writing in those days in the 1930s, that did know what the Chafetz Chaim said al pi on Torah. So now the question is, so where does it come from? So as I've mentioned in the past, numerous things relating to Reb Chaim Kamenetsky are easily traceable back to the 4th influence on him, and that is the great Vilna Gaon. So without further ado, let's discuss the Vilna Gaon and what we could see and plug it back in with Reb Chaim Kamenetsky. So first of all, in all the Torah, whether in the regular pieces on Chumash, and also I said there's also on Nach, we see an intense learning of Chumash and of Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Now, there is certain aspects of learning Chumash that we find in the Gra and then the people influenced by him that you don't necessarily see a major emphasis by Reb Chaim Kamenetsky, but let's begin. The Vilna Gaon, in the famous letter to his children, he said to them, make sure that they should learn Chumash, Kemat Bal Peh. The children of the Gra, when they talk about their father, they say the first thing he held was, you have to be Baki in Kol Chav Dalet Svarim. His Einikol, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, writes that he knew everything and he was mafarish Tanach Kula. This is when he's talking about the great Zayda, the Vilna Gaon. So not only was it Chumash, but it was also Nach. Now, just to show this, is in the famous work, Reb Toldus Adam from Reb Cheskel Feivel about the Talmud Muvak of the Vilna Gaon, Reb Zalman Mivalazhin, the brother of Reb Chaim. So it talks about one time a vart that the Gra said over in the Shir on Sefer Iyov, and he was busy chazering it, and he was spending a velt. The story part of the story was that he was chazering over the vart that the Rebbe / equal Gra spent time on developing in the Shir on Iyov. Now we have some of these Shirim on Iyov. It was published many years later. So we see it wasn't just learning the Nach, it was learning it B'iyun. One of the first works of the Gra published, actually, the first work is on Mishlei. It's not Stam a Pirish. Someone has some nice Torah and stuck it to Mishlei. No, it's a work on Mishlei, a theme, Al Pi Pshat, Al Pi Kabbalah. Tons of things are happening in this incredible, incredible work. This is someone spent time learning this Chibur of Tanach, of Nach. And we see this again and again in various works of the Gra. There were many that were missing. Some we have today. Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky in his work Tyrus Gra maps out all about this. And we see this in his Talmidim. Just to mention briefly, his Talmud, Reb Binyamin Rivlin, Mishklov, who published the work Gvia Kesef, has Nekudas about Tanach. And in at least one of them we find, and this Nakuda with Daven Achi Teufel that I said in front of the Gra, he added the following Nakuda. So we see here a deal with his Rebbe in Nach. Reb Pinchas Miplatsk, the famous Magid, who was known to have a tremendous shaykhis at the Beis Medrash of the Gra, and the Gra also, we have from him Perushim on Tehillim Mishlei Kehel Shir Ashirim Iyov. In his Tzava, we see, to make sure you should have a Seder Limud in Chumash and in Navi with Rashi. And we see this again and again, the Talmud of the Chayadam and others. Chaim Volozhiner says you should make sure to learn Tanach with Rashi. So the point that I'm bringing out is the etzem kloliistic thing of a real serious deal of learning it. Again, I'm not saying how much time, but of learning it is found clearly of great emphasis in the Beis Medrash of the Gra. And as it's known, which is going to be the subject of a different podcast of mine, the Netziv and Volozhin and where it came from, which is also rooted in all this, what the Netziv did to Volozhin when they learned Chumash B'iyun every day for 15 minutes, a half hour. Okay. Now, when the Gra learned Chumash and Nach, he was Isaac B'iyun in the maps, Nageh the Gvulas Eretz Yisrael, Chalukas HaShvatim, to understand the Sugyas of Malachim, Binyan Yecheskel, and all these works were published from the Gra. We see also, and now, so these Nakudas, Stam first of learning Nach, well, is rooted in the Gra, and I believe Reb Chaim Kamenetsky got it from that. And even the maps, which plays out in Reb Chaim Kamenetsky's work on Derech Emunah, Gvulas Eretz Yisrael, and as we're going to, and even in some places in Time Dekra, is also rooted in this Beis Medrash of the Gra. Another thing that we find, Derech Agav, as you're learning, Reb Chaim Kamenetsky, incredible Bekias in Targumim, without getting into who wrote the Targumim, whether it's Targum Yonason, whether it's Targum Yonason Menazil, Targum Yerushalmi, all these names and what they refer to. But Reb Chaim Kamenetsky was crazy into these Targumim, and he uses them throughout his works, especially Time in the Kra and Lemachseatik. So do we find anything about this in the Gra's Beis Medrash? Answer is yes. Lamashal, Rabbi Avram ben Agra and his hesped on his father, he mentions, goes out of his way. The whole mila, he would say it out loud, and we find in various works of his an intense iyun and quotations from Targumunculus and knowledge of the other Targumim. And Bechal, we find this in other people that come from the Beis Medrash Agra, most notably in Rabbi Avram ben Agra's writings and in the Netziv's writings. Rabbi Avram ben Agra even wrote a work on Targum that's been published. So this also is something found that Reb Chaim is into. Targumunculus, again, I'm not saying that Reb Chaim is Isaac in every piece of Targumunculus, but the whole concept of Targum and Targum of the Nach also is found in the Beis Medrash of the Gra. Now, there's a work which we'll discuss shortly in the next episode called Tosefta the Targum that Reb Chaim is also interested in, and he has, and where he has it from as a source. So he's taking it to a new level, but this is only based on new discoveries that we're zeicha to have in our lifetimes. Now, Another thing is something which we spoke about in the Gittin Shiurim, which is a Nakuda, which is Nageya as follows. Learning through Reb Chaim Kanievsky's Seforim, one sees, I noticed time and time again, that he has pieces where he deals with Chasser and Malei. He'll note that in one place this spelling is Chasser, in one place it's Malei. And with tremendous Bekias and Koyach HaChidush, dozens of times, he has beautiful, mostly Pshat-oriented Mahalchim to explain this. You say he's very into the Cheseres V'Yeseres in Chumash. So back in the Shiur, so first the quote, number one, Rashi in Psachim already, Daf Gimel Beis says, when talking, he says, Kol Cheseres Shabbatayra Lidroi Shein Ba'in. That the Cheseres, it's meant to darshan. There's stuff going on behind this. Chaim Kamenetsky was aware of the Menucha, but already in earlier work, the Artaira, we see this. And there was actually a lost Medrash that in the times of the Gra that Rishonim quote called Medrash Ta'amei Cheseres V'Yeseros. The Rosh brings it down. Rabbi Avram Ben Agra talks about it. He quotes the Menucha and some other Marmakaimis about it. But in recent enough years, the past 100 years, various additions and discoveries of this Medrash or parts of this Medrash have been discovered, and Chaim Kamenetsky makes use, Keseder, of this Medrash Cheseres V'Yeseres. So this Nakuda of being Dairish called Tag Shebetag of the Torah also, which is already going back from Chazal, but it's found in the base. Chaim Kamenetsky takes this to a whole new level in this sefer, Alpi Pshat. So what's it coming from? So I also would like to suggest this is also rooted into Beis Medrash of the Gra. We discussed in the Shiurim on Gittin, very important, how to spell names of Gittin, and it plays out something known as the Mesorah, which is there was a special Mesorah given over, and how it was given over and what it's given over is beyond the scope of today, but basically how to spell all different things in the Torah, and it's Nageya how to write a sefer Torah, and it's Nageya, as I'm saying over here, to how to be Dairish, all types of halachas or Ramazim. So the Beis Medrash of the Gra, Mashal Reb Zalman Volozhin was very into this, and he would look at the Nakudis and the Trop, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky Lamashal, there's a Shalshela somewhere. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky has a whole shtickle Torah Alpi Pshat. What's Pshat in the Shalshelas over here? And then he says, we're talking about the Shalshelas. Let me tell you, there's a few other times the Shalshelas mentioned. Let me explain to you what's going on in those psukim. And a few times you'll find Reb Chaim Kanievsky even being Dairish these time Kra. But these Nakudis and the Tamim of the Trop, but the Cheseres and Yeseres is Keseder found by Chaim Kanievsky dozens of times. I'm saying it's coming from the Beis Medrash of the Gra. Lamashal and Haskalah, the Haskalah Feivel gave to Reb Zalman, they gave to Shlomo Dubnov's work on Chumash. So he says, Baruch Hashem, you're working on the Cheseres, the Nakudas, Tamim, Isis, Gedolos, and through looking at it, Yanti by Matzasi by Kam Dvarim, Asher Nestapakti Bem Tamid, and it was Myrdik from the work that you're about to publish. Now, what about the Gra in all this? So Uri Shraga, son-in-law of the Gra, in the Aderes Elio, published in the early years after the Gra's Patira, massive work on Chumash, and on the Menucha, which is one of the themes that it deals with, is the Cheseres Yeseres, because as I said, it has to do with how you write the Sefer Torah. He brings a whole thing about how this was so important that the Gra was Isaac in any Shinoi in the Milos of Cheseres V'Yeseros, and he was B'dairish tons of different things. Similarly, Rabbi Avram Ben Agra in his Hesped says he was Sefer Umayna Isa Shabbat Torah, and he had all different Torahs based on the Shnei Talmudim, Bavli, Yerushalmi, Safra, Sefer, Tosefta, Mechilta. Okay. So, Bekitzer, this whole Nakuda of the Cheseres V'Yeseros that I'm showing Reb Chaim Kamenetsky again and again throughout his Sefer is Isaac. This also could link back to the Beis Medrash of the Gra. It's also true that it's Chazal, so you don't need this particular one, but since everything else is linking to the Gra, it could be it also has to do with the Gra. Now, we also see in the work of Reb Chaim Kanievsky, intense work about Rashi. Now, that's bread and butter for any person, Rashi Avada. So, Derech Agav, Klachayad, tons of times he'll show you the Makairis of a Rashi. Where's that coming from? Is massive Bakiyas and Medrash. Taris Kehanim, Sifra, Sifrei, Sifrizuta, Psikta, and all the different Midrashim Luminehem that we'll discuss later on. And then there's the Rishonim. And in the Rishonim, we have galore Ramban Lamashal. So again, it's not a work systematically to be Mefarish Ramban, but you see someone that knew Ramban by heart, and whenever it's necessary, there's a Ramban. Interestingly enough, in the letters that I quoted with Reb Dov Landau, that they begin their relationship with, what are these Gedolim and Bnei Brak? What are these Gedolim and Bnei Brak handling? The Ramban al Torah. So you see that Kalachar Yad was Pashut. How do you have to know the Ramban? Now you'll ask a Shaila, how much time, your Yeshiva Bachar, how much time in the day are you supposed to learn Ramban al Torah? How to learn Ramban al Torah? That's not a Shaila. You have to ask your own Rav. But it's clear he was into learning the Ramban. Kiyadua, we already spoke about his relationship with the Rikeach, Rabbeinu Ephraim, Moshe Zakanim, the Balei HaTosas al Torah that came out in a bunch of volumes in our lifetime. It's still coming out as we speak. Chaim Kamenetsky quotes them Keseder. So he has an intense be'iyum it's the data, but it's again, I'm being masking that it's the chiluk. It's not the same that like the Derech Hamuna you could see in the pictures. Even if I'm learning Derech Hamuna, we know how he wrote it. It was sitting kaseda on every single thing. It's every rishon. So the vart doesn't have there's a Ramban, there's Ibn Ezra, there's Cheskuni, there's it. But throughout the work, kaseda time and time again, you see he was learning these Seforim on Chumash, and eventually Derech Harai he would plug it in to this work of Talmud Ikra. Now, this is the first episode that of this, as you called it, a mini series, and the idea that I'm trying to bring out is as follows: Reb Chaim Kamenetsky learned Chumash, Be'iyun, whether it was how he wrote his pirush and how much time he spent on it and whatever, but looking at it very carefully, we could see that at some point in time, one has to find time to master and use and learn the Targumim, Rashi, Ramban, and other Rishonim. And through this, he used it to become beyond creative and create. He used this data that he learned over all the years. And as I said, I feel that he got it from the Vilna Gaon. Now, in the Mirz Hashem, in the next episodes, my what I'm going to show is to point out some of the Seforim that he used that were more interesting, that are somewhat very interesting, actually, as we'll see. And then to plug into, to give us an understanding of some of the varts and some of the Torah that he said, showing certain styles, certain things that he was concerned with. And then to conclude with a thing that Reb Chaim Kamenetsky became very famous for, and that is he became the paisik about names. People wanted to know names, if you can use this name in naming a person. It actually plays out Lo Yaleinu and Gittin, how to spell it, but which names are you allowed to use, which names are you not allowed to use, and all different types of questions relating to this. And here the Torah is galore, and Nach is galore. It's amazing to see what he'd used, his vast knowledge from learning his Tanach through his Chayvis and more for this also. And we'll have an exploration in depth of Reb Chaim Kamenetsky and the names and all the different things with Savas Rabbi Chasser and the like. Okay, so that's that. This is the conclusion for the first episode on the series.
Fascinating. So, looking forward to the next episode or two. Once again, we thank our anonymous donor who dedicated this shir, Le'ilu Nishmas, of Moshe Chaim ben Rabbi Yitzchak David, may his neshama have an aliyah. Of course, check out eliezer.brut@gmail.com. And I don't know if you were on here since you've done it, but Rabbi Brut has given hespedim on Reb David Kamenetsky and Reb Elio Greenzeig, who were two prolific writers, Talmidei Chachamim, and each focused on different areas. Worth taking a listen at Musings of a Book Collector, found on your local podcast apps and available if you search in the Old Daf website as well.